Aloha mai kako, everyone. My name is Lisa Leilani Ka'anoi, and I'm the engagement specialist for our brand new department, Mauliola Ma Lama Lama, which now includes the Native Hawaiian Health Scholarship Program. Mahalo for joining us, and mahalo to those who will be joining us via the recording. So just a few housekeeping tips. This will be recorded and shared. In the future, if there's a webinar that we have that you'd like to see but are unable to attend, as long as you register, you will receive the recording. For questions or comments, you may use the Q&A or chat feature that's on the bottom, on the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. If this is the first time you're joining us, you will be automatically added to our email list for future presentations. And last, at the end, a survey will pop up. Please share your mana'o or your thoughts with us. This is how we get topics for our future webinars. If you don't have time and you need to run after the webinar, don't worry, we'll send a follow-up email to check to see if you have time to fill it out at that time. So mahalo. I'm actually, those that don't know me, I'm both Alaska Native and Native Hawaiian, so I'm really tickled to be able to introduce these next two speakers. They are two of my favorite aunties on the American Indian Alaska Native Native Hawaiian caucus of the American Public Health Association. And I will start with Patricia. Patricia is an Inupiat born and raised in Nome, Alaska. She has served as executive director of the Alaska Native Science Commission for the past 26 years and former administrator of the Institute for Circumpolar Health at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. Now, Auntie Babette Lilinoy Galang, she is the Traditional Healing and Kupuna Council's coordinator at Papaola Lokahi. She is one of 6 children born and raised in Kalihi, where she still resides. She enjoys working at Papaola Lokahi, where she has been since 1997. She also enjoys talking to people young and old, but especially with kupuna, traditional and cultural practitioners, other Native groups, and children. And kupuna is the Hawaiian word for elders or the elderly. Babette loves what she does and is more of an early bird than an night owl. Thus, you used to be able to find her in her office by 6:30 a.m., but now you can find her online by 6:30 a.m. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Babette or Patricia. Going to start off with the pule. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Auntie Babette.
I wonder if Patricia can open up her video too. Is she having, I couldn't open my video earlier because, oh, there she is. Hi, Patricia. I just want to share mahalo for everyone for joining us, and especially mahalo to Patricia for agreeing to help me do this. And hang on, I need to get rid of this chat. Okay. And so this idea just popped up, and you know, Patricia is the one that's been behind the Wisdom of the Elders sessions, sponsored by a caucus at APHA. And it's one of the more successful sessions that we have, very well attended. So I just wanted to share with our Native Hawaiian community about this very special caucus session that we do annually. And since we are unable in the past to be in person, we have done it virtually, and we will do it again, both virtually and in person. So Patricia we'll start off this with a blessing from our revered Auntie Rita Blumenstein, who was a practitioner, master practitioner in Alaska. So go ahead, Patricia.
Mahalo, mahalo, Babette. Thank you very much for those words. I want everybody to take a moment to look at that beautiful screen behind me of the Aurora Borealis, because it puts us all in the mood for remembering where we come from, remembering what's important in our lives and the beauty of our lives. So I would like to share some of the words that came from our beloved Dr. Rita Blumenstein, although she was known to all of us as Auntie Rita. These are words that she wrote quite a while ago, but are so meaningful to all of us now. Auntie Rita says, "The past is not a burden. It is a scaffold which brought us to this day. We are free to be who we are, to create our own life out of our past and out of the present. We are our ancestors. When we heal ourselves, we also heal our ancestors, our grandmothers, our grandfathers, and our children. When we heal ourselves, we heal Mother Earth." So the words from Auntie Rita.
Mahalo for that. I'm going to stop the PowerPoint just for a second so I can get the slideshow view. Sorry about that. There we go. All right. Next slide.
Yes. So we can move to the next slide. And I wanted to take a couple of minutes just to give you some background information about the Wisdom of the Elders session, because it's been in existence for quite a long time. We're going to see a bit of the past as Babette and I go through the next PowerPoints over the next hour or so. But it took a while for those of us who began this journey many years ago to put together the reasons why we felt that the Wisdom of the Elders session was so important and why we wanted to do this. So I wanted to just take a few minutes and read that for you. It says, "Throughout Indigenous communities, elders are accorded a central role as the primary source of cultural knowledge. It should be understood that the identification of elders as culture bearers is not simply a matter of chronological age, but a function of the respect accorded to individuals in each community who exemplify the values and lifeways of the local culture and who possess the wisdom and willingness to pass their knowledge on to future generations. Respected elders serve as the philosophers, professors, and visionaries of a cultural community. As one of the primary sources of traditional cultural knowledge, Native elders bear the responsibility to share and pass on that knowledge in ways that are compatible with traditional teachings and practices. One of the greatest strengths of Indigenous communities is the reliance placed on the wisdom of Native elders. Elders continually remind us that we cannot separate the understanding of natural phenomena from the deeper knowledge that we are all spiritually connected to the earth and to Earth's creatures. The Native worldview defines health as a balance of the mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects of an individual or group being. Elders provide advice in the areas of health, medicine, and other life ways. Many elders teach from the medicine wheel or use sacred objects from Mother Earth to convey traditional cultures. Many use traditional medicine is complementary to modern Western medicine. Public health programs are increasingly utilizing the teachings of elders to improve the Native health populations. And our sessions over the many years that we've been doing them have been generously supported by grants from the National Institute of Health, the National Library of Medicine, from AARP, from ETR, and from Papa'ololokahi. So to all of our sponsors over these many years, we give great gratitude and thanks. So as I said, it took us a while to write up the reason for the wisdom of the elder sessions. And if I could, I'm going to move on to the next slide, please, ladies. Let me go through the learning objectives, because these learning objectives are part of the way that APHA processes the sessions and helps to identify people who want to join into our sessions, why they should join and what they're going to get from each of these sessions. So the learning objectives are to identify ways elders help formulate, document, and pass on traditional cultural knowledge for future generations. To understand how the use of traditional ways of knowing, teaching, listening, and learning contributes to passing on cultural knowledge to others in the community. To discuss appropriate traditional protocols to be used in the interpretation and utilization of cultural knowledge in public health programs. To discuss the elders' role to assist members of the community to acquire the knowledge and skills needed to assume the role of elder for future generations. And to discuss how elders assist Native communities in learning the skills needed to improve the health of individuals, family, and community. So all of these things are ways that we know that the wisdom and guidance from our elders have helped all of us, myself, Babette, all of us who now find ourselves in the shoes of elders, learned from the experiences from many of those in our past who are our great mentors and teachers. So I'll move to the next slide. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Babette.
These are such beautiful photos that we're fortunately were able to retrieve and keep from our files. And the first photo is Papa ʻŌiwi and Uncle Walter Austin of Alaska. They took this picture together when the American Indian Alaska Native Caucus invited Native Hawaiians to be part of their caucus. And this was November 1st, 1995. And they had a traditional ceremony. I was there, and also Loretta Hussey from Eolomau was present, and Kana Isaac was there. And this is where we met and befriended Uncle Walter. And Uncle Walter and Papa ʻŌiwi became very close friends immediately because they recognized each other's gifts of healing. And so this is a very beautiful picture. And so we have been, the Native Hawaiians have been part of the American Indian Alaska Native Caucus since 1995. So the caucus now is called American Indians Alaska Native Hawaiian Caucus. So, and the next picture, I don't know, I will talk more about Auntie Betty, but this is of Auntie Elaine Abraham and Auntie Betty Jenkins. And two kupuna, like Papa and Uncle Walter, just kind of clicked, you know, and both of them just enjoyed each other company and look forward to being together every year during the session, Wisdom of the Elders. So Patricia, would you like to share anything else?
Sure, let me just say that I was at the ceremony where Papa and Uncle Walter got together, and it was just such a joy to watch those men. Just they automatically, they just like they became immediate friends, and it was just wonderful to sit back and watch them join together, and their spirits were just alive with one another. I'd like to also talk about a little bit about Elaine Abraham. Elaine was the chairperson of my board of directors for the Alaska Native Science Commission for many, many years until she passed just a few years ago. It's very interesting because, you know, in both of our cultures, we call those women that we love and revere our aunties. But in Elaine's culture, the Tlingit culture in Alaska, there is no word for auntie. their word means little mother. And so to all of us, Elaine was little mother, and not auntie, but with the same reverence accorded to Auntie Betty and to little mother Elaine. I hope we'll get to see Auntie Betty again sometime soon, but I know Elaine's spirit lives on in all of us.
Okay, we can do the next slide. Okay, Patricia.
So let me talk a little bit about our first Elders Roundtable. And this was in 2004. This was actually before we started the Wisdom of the Elders session. This is when we first got the idea for doing the Wisdom of the Elders session, because it was a roundtable at one of our caucus meetings at APHA. And we were so blessed that we had a number of elders who were at that roundtable, including Elaine, Abraham, Malia Craver from Hawaii, Leo and Sarah Natani, who are Navajo from American Indian, and June Strickland, also Navajo from she's from Washington, from the state of Washington. So we were blessed with having all of these elders who were there sitting in on a round table. And it was such an amazing conversation, just listening to them, just hearing the experiences of all of these beautiful elders who had so much wisdom to offer, so many stories. We were mesmerized by the conversation, and none of us, there was nothing we could say. We just wanted to listen. We wanted to hear all of the words that came from them. I remember the round table lasted much longer than it was supposed to, but that was the way it was supposed to be. So that was our beginning of understanding that we needed to find a way to showcase, to share the wisdom that came from our elders in each of the sessions from the caucus from there on in. And that's where we started our next year of the Wisdom of the Elders session. So let's move on to the next round, the next slide. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Alaska Native Elders, and then turn it over to Babette, and she'll talk about some of the Hawaiian elders that came. Obviously, we know that Rita Blumenstein was one of the amazing people in our area in Alaska, a Yupik from the Bethel area. She lived all of her life in the Waikare area, the Yukon-Kuskokwim area. She was one of my oldest and dearest mentors and friends. She and her husband, Bernie, moved into Nome when I was quite young and lived right across the street from me. So she really became, although she wasn't by blood my auntie, she really was my auntie because they were so close. She is the one who taught me everything that I know about traditional medicine, about healing, about how to do a real talking circle, not what people nowadays call a talking circle, but the real one, the cultural way of doing it. And I'll tell you that I apprenticed with Auntie Rita for at least like 10 years before I was allowed to do my own traditional talking circle. There's a great deal of knowledge and information that has to come to be able to understand what that means and what your responsibility is as the leader of the talking circles. So I give all honor and blessing to Rita for all that information she left with me. Elaine Abraham, of course, was my touchstone when my own mother passed quite a few years ago at 95, I will say. So my mom had a really wonderful long life. She was obviously my first teacher of everything that I know. But when my mom died, Elaine really became my other mom, even though she was Tlingit and I'm a Nukdak. We were very, very close, and she taught me many things, but mostly about traditional knowledge, about language, about culture, about the importance of remembering who we are as Native people and remembering to do things in Native ways, to practice all of our values every day, and to learn our cultures and to pass them on. The next elder is actually my sister, one of my older sisters, MJ. Her real name is Mary G, but we've always called her MJ. She is now living in Arizona. She lives with her daughter. She is elderly now, but she was one of our elders. You can see one of her proud moments, catching fish. We all know how important that is to us, and wearing her beaver hat. Very interesting. When we grew up in Nome, there weren't any beaver in our area because there just was no food source for them. We didn't have any trees in the Arctic in the north. Interestingly enough, now we are overrun with beaver because of climate change, because of everything that has happened, and we now have trees in those areas where there never used to be any forage for the beaver. But we learned how to make really good beaver hats. So that's one of the things that came from our lessons. The next one is a Victoria Demert. She's also another Tlingit from Yakutat. She has been everything in that community. She's also, Auntie Elaine was indeed her aunt. So she learned much from Elaine as well. She still lives in Yakutat, has served in almost every capacity there, from their council to their school district to business owner and many other things. And I'm honored to say that I now also fill that role as the Newtap elder. I'm now 72 and still doing very well. I'm always very happy to share whatever information I have. I have to say that my biggest responsibility I see now as an elder is to take all of the knowledge that I've learned from all of the people in my past and to make sure I'm leaving that for generations to come. So that is my passion now, is really mentoring all of the young people who come behind us. So that's it for me. I'll pass it back over to you, Babette.
Next slide, please. All these beautiful people. The first, Patricia used to call me and says, Babette, I need a Native Hawaiian elder, to participate in the round table or to participate in a presentation. So I said, okay. So in 2004, I went to Auntie Malia Craver and said, Auntie, would you be willing to fly to Washington, D.C. and be in a presentation on a round table at that time? And she was so gracious and said, yes, of course, and, it's like for Kupuna to fly from Hawaii to Washington, D.C., to me, that's a killer flight because for me, it's such a long flight. You have like 5.5 hours to get to the mainland and another like 5 or 6 hours to get to Washington, D.C. So she went along with, at that time, she took Cuddles. She took Cuddles, excuse me, with her. And Cuddles' real name, geez, I can't even think of it offhand. But I just knew her as Cuddles. So she and Cuddles went, and they were very happy with what happened. And Auntie Malia was very happy about meeting all the other elders, the Alaska Natives and American Indians. And Cuddles' name is Luella King. Thank you, Donna. Luella King, but I never knew her as Luella. I knew her as Cuddles. So that was in 2004. And then in 2005, I had approached Auntie Mary Frogus. Auntie Mary Frogus is from Hawaii Island. And I had asked her, and it was supposed to be in New Orleans. But in 2005, New Orleans had a hurricane, right, Patricia? And so they moved APHA from New Orleans to, was it Pennsylvania? Was it Pennsylvania? I can't even remember where it was. So they moved. They moved it to Pennsylvania, correct. So I asked Auntie Margaret's daughters, Narita and Lana, if they were willing to travel to do this presentation. And both of them said yes. Now, the reason why I had to ask kupuna who were available to do this. So even though you may ask, well, how come so-and-so wasn't asked, so-and-so wasn't asked? It was because they weren't available during that time period. But Auntie Mary Fraga's family said, she ain't going, she's staying put. Because after that hurricane scare and APHA literally moving the conference from New Orleans to Pennsylvania. So then that's why I asked Narita and Lana that went to accompany her. So Narita Machado did the Wisdom of the Elders in 2005. And then in 2006 to 2008, Auntie Betty Jenkins, I approached Auntie Betty Jenkins and said, would you like to participate in the Wisdom of the Elders? And she said, of course, very graciously said, of course. And so she went to Wisdom of the Elders in 2006. It was in Boston. She went with Mahealani Merriman. I couldn't go to all of these APHs. So if I couldn't go, then I asked the kupuna who they would like to accompany them. And in 2007, Auntie Betty went to Washington to DC with Auntie Gladys Honey Lennox. Then in 2008, Auntie Betty and Auntie Honey both went to San Diego for Wisdom of the Elders session. In 2009, Auntie Betty went with Mahealani again, and this time it was in Pennsylvania. In 2010, Auntie Betty could not make it. So I asked Likeke and Lynette Paglinawan, Uncle Likeke and Auntie Lynette, if they were willing to go to Denver for Wisdom of the Elders. And they said yes, they were very happy. So that was the first time that I actually invited a couple to present. And I think Patricia, they both presented or together, yeah? They both presented together. Okay, let's see. Then Auntie Betty, going back to Auntie Betty, continued to join Wisdom of the Elders in 2011 in Washington, DC again. And from 2013 to 2016, she attended all the Wisdom of the Elders, and her kako included, besides Auntie Honey, Auntie Lehua Bongo, and myself. So next slide, please. Other Native Hawaiian elders who also participated in Wisdom of the Elders, because at that time we couldn't find at the last minute someone to replace a kupuna who was scheduled to go, but for some reason got ill. So we have our Napu'uwai Executive Director, Kamahana Hokulani Farrar, who went and sat on that Wisdom of the Elders chair, representing Native Hawaiians in 2012 in San Francisco. The next kupuna is Auntie Lehua Bongo, and she was kako'o to Auntie Betty from 2013 to 2016, and starting in 2017 to last year, Auntie Lehua Bongo represented Native Hawaiians on the Wisdom of the Elders session. Auntie Honey Lennox was always Auntie Betty's kako, but Auntie Betty told me that Auntie Honey did sit with Auntie Betty at the table and did share some kupuna ike. I also, in 2017, I was sitting in the audience and Patricia told me, Babette, get up there to the table. And I said, what? Auntie Lehua is sitting there. She can do it. And Patricia said, get up to that table. And so the second time I said, okay, so from that day on, from 2017 till now, I am now officially kupuna and am now sitting in the sessions for our caucus. And the last but not least, our own Makua O'o is kupuna in training, our own Sherry Daniels. And she covered for us in 2019 in Pennsylvania. Correct, Patricia? I couldn't make it and none of the other kupuna could make it and whoever was supposed to go didn't show up. So Sherry graciously said that she would do it. So mahalo, Sherry, good training and good experience. Thank you. Next slide, and Patricia can take over the next slide.
Thank you, Babette. So I'm going to just go over the next couple of slides, honoring and remembering all of the American Indian elders who participated. And these are ones that, as Babette has noted, since we've been starting this session a long time ago, we've had quite a few different people from the American Indian community. And I'd like to recognize them. Many of them, or some of them have passed on, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But let me first recognize Kathleen Gordon, who is Cayuse, Edward Gray, who's Mohawk, Essie Carter, who's Nez Perce, Julian Corries, who is Santo Domingo Pueblo, and Ruby Brocky, who is White Clay. So all of these people were wonderful, wonderful representatives from American Indian community. And they, again, all of our elders have just been wonderful people who've shared so much knowledge and wisdom with all of us. Let's go to the next slide of American Indian elders.
Patricia?
Yeah.
Can I just say a little about Eddie Gray, the Mohawk? Eddie
Sure.
Gray, I met him years ago. He is part of the Haudenosaunee Nation, which is titled by the non-Indians as the Iroquois Confederacy. And they are the only, they have their own nation in the United States and they have their own passports. Eddie Gray does like herbal medicine too. And he was invited in 2005 to our Lapakahi gathering along with Auntie Rita and Uncle Walter. But I just wanted to say that I know Eddie Gray and he is, he's a Mohawk and he lives in the section that is now part of Canada, you know, so I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you. Thank you, Patricia.
Thanks, Babette. And the other set of the American Indian elders, Vivian Arvizo, I remember her getting together with Elaine and Auntie Betty, and they were together for a couple of years of going to APHA, and you could just see them. They were like this little gaggle of wonderful geese. Always they'd come together and they'd just laugh and talk and sit together. They had such fun. It was a beautiful thing just to watch them become such close friends and companions. Also recognizing Esther Yazzie Lewis, who's Navajo, Ursula Milky Wilson, also Navajo, Michael Bird, who's Kiowa Pueblo, and of course, Michael is still hanging on with us. He's part of a very important part of the caucus. He's the first ever Native American chair of the American Public Health Association. Um, very active still, and is now, as Babette and I, we have taken off our elder in training hats and moved into the elders positions, trying to fill some pretty big shoes. And last but not least on the list is Lillian Tom Orm, who's a Navajo. Lillian is also still very active in the caucus. She works with students of the caucus and is responsible, along with Sarah Suzuki, for bringing all of our student scholars together to the caucus every year. So that's a little bit about all of the people who've been part of our caucus Wisdom of the Elders session. I'm going to move into the next slide, but I want to talk a little bit about the student scholars and their role in, here we are. The student scholars and their role in the Wisdom of the Elders session. When we first started the Wisdom of the Elders session, the elders really were, they would many times just come up and speak as they wanted to speak for as long as they wanted to speak. Some of them would bring PowerPoint presentations, some would bring slides. You know, it was really a much more open conversation of just listening to everyone, to all of the elders there and the stories that they wanted to share. And over the years, the elders decided that they wanted to get the students, they wanted to get the young people more involved, because of course it's all about passing on to the next generations. So they wanted a way to get together with the students and to bring that kind of capacity, that kind of training into the caucus and into the Wisdom of the Elders session. So I'm happy to say that I was in the startup of the Wisdom of the Elders session, and have sort of coordinated and moderated it since its inception. So I worked with the elders and designed a way for our students to become active with the Wisdom of the Elders session. And that's been going on for quite a number of years now. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go into it. But these are just some of the beautiful students that have been participants in as part of our student scholars. Unfortunately, Babette and I we didn't have information for all of the student scholars that have been there in the past, but it's something we're going to try to put together so that we can recognize all of the student scholars who've been part of it. So one of the ways the elders wanted to bring the students together was to have the students begin to ask questions of the elders. They wanted them to be able to respond to what was really on the minds of young people. How could we really help them to learn the lessons of today? So we started, I started working with Lillian to put together the questions from students. So now all of the student scholars who are selected from for each of the years, they come up with 2 to 3 questions to ask each of the elders. And that's how we now run our sessions, is that the students now, instead of me moderating the sessions, they learn and they're trained to help to moderate the sessions, to work more closely with the elders, to ask questions of them, and to be much more an interactive part of the session. So that's the way it is. It's now working. Again, you can see some of the incredible people we've had. Lisa, is it possible to go into our caucus website and to see if we can look at a little bit of that? If not, it's okay, but if we can link into the website there, that would be really helpful. Let me know if you can or cannot do that.
I'll try. I'll have to stop sharing for now. Let's see.
Great. So yeah, so here's our caucus website. And if you can go into the About section of it, and you can see the student scholars, and just if you can scroll down into the student scholars. Yeah, that didn't click over, so. There we go. Okay, so you can see some of our scholars. This was from last year, from 2020, where we did all virtual. So you can see we had some amazing folks who were part of our 2020 scholars. And part of the responsibility of the scholars is to write up their reflections, what they experienced during the APHA and all of the information that they learned. So if you go into the website, you can actually go through some of the student reflections, see what they experienced as part of the APHA, what their favorite sessions were, which I'm happy to say were almost always the wisdom of the elder session. That is the one that they're most attuned to and get the most out of. But you can see some of our 2019 students, who they were. You can see Sarah Suzuki, Native Hawaiian, was one of them. And anyhow, we're going to beef up the rest of this as we go through getting more information on the students. But it's a really important part of keeping our students involved. Babette, do you want to add anything more to that?
No, I think the next slide is the list of the Native Hawaiian Scholar recipients.
And thank you, Lisa, so very much for taking care of all of this technical detail for Babette and I. We would never be able to do it.
So the next slide. She's working on the next slide.
Yeah, that was
now you jinxed me.
Come on, Lisa, you can handle it.
Okay, let's see if I got it now.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
that's it.
That's it. I could only go as far back as 2017. There were a Native Hawaiian representative every year. And so in 2017, Maya Uemoto was the representative, was the scholar recipient. And Maya, if you don't know, is Joanne Sark's daughter. And yeah, and she's now working at the University of Hawaii and got her degrees. In 2018, Natalie Kamakaike Brucer was the recipient. Kamakaike, as we call her, also worked with Papa Ololokahi for a while. And so we really got to know her and she really got to know us. In 2019, Sarah Suzuki was selected, and Sarah has since joined our caucus program committee. She's now involved with recruiting future scholarship recipients. And last year, I didn't get to meet her in person. And this in-person meeting is so important. And I think we are kind of sad by that we can no longer meet. Like I can talk to Patricia, but it's not like seeing her in person. But Sarah Phillips, unfortunately, I just met virtually and not in person. But let me just add that ever since Patricia, another of her brilliant ideas about letting the students write the questions, ever since that happened from that year on, the students got really close to the elders and the kupuna. And I noticed that because in the past, when the elders would just can talk whatever they want, and even though we gave them a time limit, you cannot cut kupuna from talking, right? You can't do this or do any kind of like, excuse me, auntie, And so sometimes Auntie Betty would say, boy, I only got 5 minutes, you know, because so-and-so, you know, and she didn't, she just spoke in the 5 minutes and did the best she can. But the students were in the audience and they were just part of the audience, you know, they weren't like participating and interacting with the kupuna and the elders. So it was wonderful once this started that I really noticed their attachment to kupuna and how throughout the period that we were there, and they would spend time with them, you know, like they would spend time with Auntie Lehua, you know, and talking to her, and, you know, maybe they heard something you said that was very important and touched their hearts. That even like you, Patricia, I noticed a lot of students would come to talk to you, would come and talk to me, you know, and it was very nice to be able to have that relationship with the students. And I think they got more out of the session and their scholarship time than they did in the past, you know, but that's just my mana'o, that's just my thinking. So thank you very much. Patricia, you want to share anything about any of your Alaska Native students?
Well, what I'd like to say is to remind everybody on the call that that we do have an application process for students. If you know any wonderful students who you think might want to apply to be one of the student scholars, you can go onto our website. We have selected all of the students for this year, but we do this every year. We usually start in like June or something like that, advertising for student scholars. We always get many more applicants than we can fund. I think we're able to fund 6 this year, and I can't remember, we had like 17 or 18 applicants this year. So yeah, we're always looking for additional sponsorship. So if you can find students, or I see a question here, it's open to American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian students. So yeah, and all of the criteria is listed on the website. So you can take a look at that, and hopefully you can help us to come up with some more people to apply for it. Also want to just quickly mention about our social, because the social is a really important event. It's not really part of our Wisdom of the Elder session, but the social has become such an amazing part for our students and our elders and all of the community to get together. We always have a social on Monday night of our convention at APHA, and it's one of the best times where people really get together. And as we all know, sharing stories, sharing food, sharing dances, that's really where we have an opportunity, not in a session, but just in a time to really get together and know one another and share the love with each other. So just wanted to mention that as well. If we can move into the next slide, please, Lisa. So I wanted to give you a flavor of some of the kinds of questions that our student scholars have come up with. And it was really interesting when I was selecting these. I have literally hundreds of questions that have come from students over the years. So I was trying to select a few of them that I thought represented a whole lot of issues or questions that came from the students. And as Babette and I were looking at these questions that I pulled from over the years, it was really interesting to then look back to the learning objectives, what we were trying to make sure that we presented, and the information we were trying to get across to everybody, that these student scholars questions really hit on all of the learning objectives and the reason for the Wisdom of the Elder session to exist. So these were just some of the questions that they came up with. What do you believe are going to be the most pressing public health issues for Natives in the coming years? So I'm going to ask Babette and I if we will take a couple of minutes and to talk about our responses to that. So I'll talk about what I see as the most pressing public health issues. For me, obviously from my background, which is in climate, I do a lot of climate science. the climate issues, climate change, global warming, and all of the huge impact that we're seeing in all of our communities. I see that as being one of the biggest public health issues, not just in human health, but in environmental health, in health of our lands, our waters, our creatures, our animals that live with us. Because as we know, to us, that's all part of our community. We live with the air, the water, the earth. All of those things are important parts of us. So for me, I really see climate change as being a really important and pressing public health issue over the years to come. I also see the pandemic that we're going through now as a huge issue, because I remember my mom talking about the 1918 flu epidemic, where she lost everyone in her family except for her father during that epidemic, and the lessons that we have to learn, not only from that epidemic of 1918, but what we're learning today, because unfortunately, this is not the last epidemic that we're going to see, the last pandemic. There's just no question. You can see from the variants that are happening now that this is something that's going to persist, that's going to be with us for generations to come. We need to learn how to deal with it, to learn from the past, to learn from the present, to help us to go forward into the future. Babette, your comments.
Okay. Let's see. I think the most pressing public health issue is what you mentioned about the pandemic and dealing with unresolved stress and anxiety and anger. And, you know, all these problems, it's almost like we're reliving historical and cultural trauma today, you know, and sometimes I wonder if the reason why many of our Lahui is having difficulty dealing with this, because they are reliving their ancestors' trauma, our ancestors' trauma. And I think this is going to be an area that we really have to fall back on our cultural practices and cultural values, and even our traditional healing practices. You know, we're trying to, as coordinator of the Kupuna councils at the 5 Native Hawaiian healthcare systems and at Waianae Coast Comp, you know, we come together twice a month to have discussions, and they're all really, really working hard dealing with Native Hawaiians who are seeking spiritual help, or just seeking help in how to deal with what we are going through right now. It's a very difficult time for many people, not only for our Native Hawaiians, but I really don't know how this can ever get resolved. I don't think it ever will get resolved, but we can try to, and it's very difficult, you know, to stop being angry. And it's very difficult to manage the stress, because now you have double problems. You have financial problems, you have issues with your children, with your kupuna, with your families. You know, it's not like you can just take them to the doctor. It's not like you can just take them to ER. You know, that's not an option anymore. You know, you have to now, as our elders did in the past, we have to deal with it ourselves. But if you don't have the training, or you don't have, well, I wasn't trained in Ho'oponopono, you know, so you have to pull it. You know, it's like in my training, we always pull it, and we always try to share compassion and forgiveness and patience, that there's light at the end of the tunnel, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that there is hope. People must have hope. If they don't have hope in their life, then it's very difficult for them to begin to even start living whatever they consider a normal life. But I think that the public health issues for all natives will be very challenging. And I think the next generation will be able to take care of this. We're going to pass our ʻike to them, our knowledge to them, and they can do the best you can. And that's all we're asking. You do the best you can with information and knowledge coming from your heart. What to do, what can I do? You pule and you think about everything that was taught to you and the good things, the positive things, and the answers will appear. You just have to really believe that. But it's a very challenging and a very unusual situation we are in. And even for the practitioners, the traditional healers and stuff, they're having to face people with different problems, not just diabetes and heart and cancer. Now people have major problems mentally and emotionally and even maybe spiritually. They're kind of lost, so. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you, Babette. Thank you. I want to go back for a minute and correct something that, thank you, Lillian, for sending me a quick message to say that Auntie June Strickland, is Cherokee. She's not Navajo. And I should have caught that because I know her very well. I speak with her all the time. And I'm just so embarrassed that I didn't catch that on her slide. So Auntie June, if you're on, I apologize for that. I'm very sorry. We'll make sure that we correct that, but please understand Auntie June is an amazing elder, worked at the University of Washington in public health for many, many years, now retired, and she and Sam, her husband, are still active in their communities. I'm so sorry, Auntie June. I'll make sure that we correct that in the slides as we go forward. Next, the next question from the scholars was, what is the biggest health issue for elders in our community right now, and what can be done to change this? I think we'll go through just a few of these questions, maybe not all of them, because I know we're getting short on time here. But for me, having lived through my mom going through 95 years, I'll tell you, it was very, very difficult watching the aging process, especially with dementia, because to me that's one of the big issues that we see going on in our communities right now. What do we do with our people who were always part of our homes, and now trying to find places where they live, if not with their family? Where are they going to be now? How are we going to be able to keep them and their culture still alive when they're in places like in elder homes or communities? Those are the kinds of things that worry me, especially as I progress in age. Where will we be? Where will we end up as elders in our communities? How do we keep what we have alive and passing it on when we may not be an important or living part of that culture as we would have in the past, living with our relatives when you're living now in a home somewhere. So those are some of the just quick concerns. Babette, anything?
I just wanted to add to what you said, that elders, like we are like elders, and it's just trying to help the ohana and trying to live the best way and the best life you can do despite all the circumstances, that we are now facing, and just keeping spirituality within the family and just trying to be the best person to be an example of using cultural values in just living this life now. So, and of course, like you said, Alzheimer's and dementia, how do we deal with that? You know, I know that we would never place Ohana in a care home unless it was necessary, that we try to take care of our own. And because of the economic situation in Hawaii, many people, the homes are like multi-generational. So you have many families and many people living in one home. So, you know, that's a big problem for elders to how to keep safe and how to help in their own way in keeping their families together. So, okay, next question.
Okay, the next question was, what traditional values do you believe are important to incorporate into public health research? And how do you suggest the next generation of researchers find ways to incorporate tradition in research? I'll let you take that first, Babette.
Oh boy. Okay. Wait, we lost the questions. So anyway,
I'll put them back up. I just wanted to have that off the screen so we can concentrate on your talk story. I hope you don't mind.
so what are you doing, Lisa?
Oh no, I was just taking it off so we could concentrate on your talking story.
No, I need to read the question. You gotta put it.
Oh,
on,
shucks,
Lisa.
sorry.
Okay.
Here, I'll put it back up.
One of the problems that happens within research is that it's very scientifically based. And so when traditional practitioners or when elders talk, they're talking about the spiritual component, the cultural component, and it's very difficult. I think the public health researchers and data people, they have to figure out how to do this. You know, we're not going to figure out. We're just going to say, you can ask us, we can talk about our values, we can talk about our cultural components, we can talk about spirituality, but it's like, it's your job to try to figure out how the next generation of researchers can find ways to incorporate traditions in their research. I know I participated in a webinar with Lillian, who tried to have us talk about this very question, you know. And so what each presenter did was they just presented their cultural values, and they just talked about what they do, and that's it. But they didn't specifically say this is what you need to do. I think both can work together to figure it out, and I don't have an answer for that, because we're talking fruits, but we're talking apples and oranges. So thank you, Patricia. The researcher, you're a researcher.
Well, yeah, I'll add more to this, because I've been doing research for the last 50 years or so. I will tell you that we've spent a lot of time in trying to bring our native ways of knowing, learning, and teaching into the not only into the classroom, but also into research. And many of us have spent many years in writing articles and talking about the ways research should be done. The good news is that a lot of that information is readily available. On my Science Commission, Alaska Native Science Commission website, we have spelled out a lot of the information about how you can conduct research in a traditional way, and what the importance is of thinking in a different way. Because you know, science is all about what's the most information you can gather? I mean, how do we really look at everything, get the best questions, the best minds together, and then make a decision, make your information come from that basis. And so you really need to look at everything. You need to look at Western science, at Native science, at cultural values, at all of those kinds of things that impact everything around us. The good news is that in the 40, 50 years I've been doing it, I have seen it change a lot. From when I first started, when there was no other way to do science and research except the way that you were taught in Western training. There was no other, that was it. You weren't allowed to think outside that box. I can luckily say that things really have changed now. Researchers understand, scientists understand that there is a real reason to take a look at other ways of knowing, learning, and teaching. That there is a great benefit in doing that, to add to that body of science, that body of research. And that includes things like community-based research, like research that comes from the community itself, that it's not just somebody trying to get their PhD, but actually something that can help that community, because the need for that research has been identified by that community. And then you can find somebody who's interested in that to come and help you find the answers to that. So that's part of community-based and participatory research. The good news is that we have been training our own researchers for the last 40 years, that we have many of our own Native community who are actively engaged, who are now the PhDs who are doing that research. We don't have to convince them that traditional values and culture are important as part of research, because they already know that. And luckily, they're beginning to share that kind of knowledge with everybody else around them. I've seen those kinds of things that are changing now in the university system, because I'm asked all of the time to come into some of the largest and prestigious Western societies, Western education societies. They ask for us to do training, for us to share the knowledge that we have, so that they can be better researchers, they can be better scientists, better educators. So they're reaching out to our communities and understanding how important it is. So that's my sharing for that piece of it.
Yeah, and I also wanted to say that Joanne Sark and Catherine Braun have always encouraged Native Hawaiians to be researchers. And you know, I'm not that type of person, you know, who is like scientific based and all. So I didn't really understand the value of that. I mean, I knew it was important, but I have a better understanding of the importance of it. And like you said, today, fortunately, we have many Native Hawaiian researchers, you know, who already have that knowledge of values and of their culture. So, you know, that's wonderful. So thank you, Patricia.
Okay.
Answer 405, you know, you're stressing me out, Patricia.
You're doing just fine. So we talked a little bit already about the 1918 pandemic and how people continue to take care of themselves. So I think we won't go through all of that question again. But I'm going to end with this final question from students. What life experience have you had that addresses racial equality and justice? And what changes do you believe need to be made to better address these issues?
Okay, you first, Patricia, while I
think about it. Okay. Yes. Well, you know, I can tell you for a fact that certainly Babette and I and our parents and everyone around us have had issues of inequality and justice for all of our lives. I know my mother had it in a totally different way, and I know I've experienced it in every position that I've had from schooling on up. You know, my mom was one of those people who was removed from the village when she was 8 years old. She was removed from her village and sent to an Indian school outside in Oregon, where she left knowing absolutely nothing but Nup'ik language and was forced into a society that knew nothing but English, she had to totally relearn everything, from the time you were 8 years old, and didn't go back to her own community until she was in high school. See, I can't even imagine the kind of injustice, the kind of inequality, the kind of anger and everything else that must have come from that that generation of our parents and grandparents who are lost, who are forced into this new world that they knew nothing about. So I can easily say that I think that my life has been much easier, that I did not have that. I came from a loving family, that my mom really made sure that we knew who we were, that we were grounded in our culture, that we knew that we were loved and cared for. But that was not her world. In my world, things changed. And I said the inequality, the injustices that I saw were mostly, honestly, and having to do with race. And because I was a Nubel, I was not white. My father was white. My mother was Nubel. So, the injustices that you face because of who you are, because I was a half-breed. I grew up kind of with that whole life around me. So I know what it's like. I knew the injustices that I felt in college, in school, when I went to university, and just the fact that I came from a very different point of view. That I learned from the time I was born. I knew about the Native worldview. I knew about my tradition and my culture. That was ingrained into me, but that had no place in the Western training that I learned, especially in university. So it was very, those were the kinds of things that I personally have had to go through. Many, many other issues like that in research and education. But I wanted to just share some of the personal side of that from my experiences. And I'll turn it over to you, Babette.
Okay, I just wanted to say that as a Native Hawaiian and living in an island community and separated by hundreds of miles of ocean, that we did not experience genocide. We did not experience our parents or ancestors being removed, like the American Indians and Alaska Native, the children removed from the homes. We never experienced any of that. In fact, at one time, Auntie Betty turned to me and said, when we went to this conference in Canada, and the elders were there and talking about being removed, like your mama, and it was just, they were crying, So Auntie Betty turned to me and said, "What are they talking about? What are they talking about? I love being dormed. I love living away and living in the school." I said, "Auntie Betty, Kamehameha school dorming is very different from what they're talking about. That as children, they were removed as children, and to take away their identity and to make them into white people, and so we never experienced that. My mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, they never experienced any of that. We did have other issues that our elders dealt with, and today we still deal with that. And I personally don't understand the inequality of Native Hawaiian being treated very differently through the state's eyes. And, it's just like the issue of Mauna Kea, it had nothing to do with not supporting science. It had nothing to do with the issues the state kept bringing up, kept pounding into people's, Native Hawaiians don't support astronomy, that's a lot of BS, The issue for me was, why are they doing this? You know, why is the state doing this? Because the issue is not living up to their promises and not helping with all the issues we face today. And I think the mistrust and not believing anything that is coming from, say, the state. And I think it's because they don't know our history. They think they know it, but they only know the history based on what is written. And like one person said, who writes Hawaiian history? Who's writing the Hawaiian histories? Are Native Hawaiians writing Hawaiian history? And so we have to go back, and even to go back to the histories that our own people wrote. And so it's very hard. I feel aloha when I go to a conference and I see American Indians of my generation crying and talking about how their great grandparents or great grandparents or great great grandparents were killed or starved to death, you know. And it just like, I just can't fathom that, you know. How could any human being do that, you know? But I don't even think that I answered the question, you know. I go off. So listen. But anyway, thank you very much, Patricia, for sharing that history about your personal life, and we appreciate that. And I think that as now elders, we have to keep sharing knowledge and planting seeds of what is important in our culture, so that the next generation has that and know the questions to ask and know when their red flag should go up because of what the person is saying, and to listen to what they're not saying and to understand that, because I think that's very important in making good choices. It doesn't have to, I think it's important that we all learn to make good choices based on well, for me, it's now based on my na'au and my heart and my conversations with Keakua. But it took me a long time, you know. I wasn't like this like 30 years ago. You know, it takes a long time with everything stored in the back of our head and the lights coming on at the appropriate time, things that the kupuna I mentored with, you know, told me stuff, and only now it's popping up in my head, and it's go, that's what they meant, you know. So now that we have all this ike, this knowledge, we can now try to pass it on as best we can to the next generation and plant that seed, plant those seeds, so that, you know, when the time is right and they nurture it, they water it and they nurture it, they will have the answers, you know, and live a better life. But anyway, amen. Mahalo Keakua, mahalo Patricia. Lisa, I don't know if Patricia has anything else to say. If there's any questions, you can direct it to Patricia.
You did great, Auntie Babette. I did a pulley for you to make sure you got through the last question.
Thank you.
That was wonderful. This is just exactly what I needed to hear. Just some reassuring words from aunties, because it is a rough time right now, and it's hard to not be in person to receive this kind of knowledge. I mean, that's inherent in all of our cultures, right? So mahalo nui loa kuiana for joining us today. We're open to questions, comments, feedback. Auntie Patricia, I wanted to ask you where you got your beautiful atakluk or your kaspa.
A friend of mine makes them for me. Yeah, so I'm very, very lucky that, yeah, she makes all of them, my kaspas, and I do my earrings, but she makes the kaspas.
Oh, I might have to start a little line going.
I think we have a couple of final slides, Lisa, if we can we can go into one of our last slides could be, because we wanted to
Okay.
remember to honor those of our elders who have passed.
Okay, let me get on there. Oops. Where's it?
Well, while you're doing that, let me just share one quick story with you guys. I remember it must have been 30 years ago when we first started talking about sharing our culture, sharing our language, especially when we weren't all together. Yes, reflecting on the Babette said of not being able to see one another and share stories. Well, we had a big conversation about whether or not we should start writing down and whether we should start taking videos, all of these things that we now are doing Zoom. You know, we would never have thought of years ago, but we had big conversations in our communities here in Alaska about whether or not we should start recording the elders, because that's not the way we do things. It's sitting down and listening to your auntie, and the huge conversation we had about how disrespectful it is if your kids can click on and off your stories, you know, because that was a really big thing everybody was talking about. But in the end, all of the elders decided it was worth it, that we had to find ways, since we were losing so many of our elders in so many ways, that we had to find new technology. We had to find ways that we could actually live with to pass on those stories. So that's why we began doing recordings, but it wasn't without a whole lot of thought before we got to that place. So we wanted to end here now with the last couple of slides in memory to a number of our kapuna, our elders who have passed on. And would you like to read through that list, Babette, and give honor to them?
Okay, it's we're honoring our hulu kupuna. This is very special kupuna. Papa Awai, Uncle Walter, Austin, Auntie Lane or Abraham, Auntie Rita Bloomingstein, Auntie Malia Craver, Leo Natani. Unfortunately, I was never able to meet him because he probably came a year that I wasn't there. And Likeke Paglinowan, Mr. Paglinowan was the administrator when I first worked at the Office of Foreign Affairs. And so I got to know him very well. He used to always says, let's line up the ducks, you know, let's line up, he used to have to say, Auntie Kathleen Gordon, Auntie Uncle Julian Cortez, and Ruby Rocky. Some of these kupuna or these elders, unfortunately, I never met because I wasn't present at the APHA that year, you know, but we just wanted to honor them and say mahalo to all of them for helping us walk through this life and live this life. So, and I think there's another slide. Lisa, there's another slide.
Yeah, the ending slide is just a reminder. Please feel free to go onto our caucus website. We have a lot of wonderful information and stories, information about elders, people who have passed on, and we hope that you'll join us as members of the caucus. It's a wonderful opportunity to really get to know one another and to share our love and experiences in person, we hope, in the years to come.
Before we leave, Lisa, I think Patricia and I would just like to say some closing words. Don't we, Patricia? We have like what? Oh, we're done. We're done. I'll say really fast. We must seek truth. We must be kind. We must have compassion and love, as Papa Wai said. And we must share aloha. And the lessons come when we least expect it. The lessons come when we are tired. And this is when we really have to pull up ourselves and be kind to people and stop the anger, you know. So mahalo everyone for attending, and this is very informal. Patricia and I just kind of, as usual, we just go back and forth. And she surprised me with those questions, let me just tell you. But mahalo everyone, and thank you, Patricia. You have a few quick words.
Just to everyone, be safe, be healthy, love someone next to you today. Just give hugs to people that you care about, because we all need love and hugs these days.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa.
Mahalo. Does anybody have any last questions or comments? I get a lot. That's why kupuna knowledge is so beautiful, sharing their personal experiences as well as what was passed to them. Mahalo nui, I needed those kupuna words. Ike kupuna kupayanaha no ho'i, the wisdom of the elders, truly astonishing. Nui ka mahalo, ina kupuna, aloha and mahalo ohana. Oh, and I got a mahalo. Mahalo. Mahalo for a wonderful session. Mahalo to me too for the behind the scenes magic. I'll try to be an elder in training.
Makua o, makua o.
So wonderful that everyone could join us. The recording will probably be ready in about a week. Just want to say mahalo again for Patricia, because you're actually calling in from
Anchorage,
Alaska. So that is that 2 hours difference. You guys are ahead of us, yeah? Okay. And so, yeah, if anybody has any feedback or questions after this, there will be the survey, or you can also email me directly. And I just want to say that I love the Northern Lights behind you. I might have to steal that background. That's what I grew up with. And when I moved to Hawaii, I was like, why is the sky so boring? And then I learned about rainbows. So I feel lucky I come from families where I can see Northern Lights or rainbows. So, okay, I'll ask if Auntie Patricia and Auntie Babette can hang on for just a couple minutes, but ahui ho, everybody. Malama pono, malama kikahi kikahi. Our next webinar is on the 24th, and it's also kupuna themed. We're going to talk about how kupuna or the elderly can navigate insurance. So stay tuned for that on the 24th, and I'll send out an announcement as soon as we get the flyer ready. Okay. Have a good weekend, everybody. Ahui ho.